Alright, well, welcome back guys to part 2 of this WRX installation, and I've got the go-ahead to rip this apart and get it clean, make it right. So right now I've went ahead and I started to disconnect the turbo so I can get that out of the way. I can start taking off these brackets after, and we can remove this exhaust manifold. But beforehand, I just want to kind of address that throughout this entire engine, I'm sure someone who does this for a living has noticed it already, but all this hardware is not OEM. You can see these big, this is something like you would get down at Lowe's, and I can't even turn this because it's hitting the side of the turbo itself. So these things are huge. That's not supposed to be like that. This is not, I mean, you can tell just by the stamped on top that this is something that you would go to the hardware store and get. And it's throughout the entire engine, even throughout like all these brackets and whatnot. The AC compressor is bolted down with it. The same thing with, with just about everything on here. All the accessories, so power steering is bolted on, with all the hardware. Same thing here. There was a bunch of other discrepancies. The alternator, like the tensioner itself, the bolt and the nut that goes through here, it's like a threaded bolt. That's completely missing. So they just basically hard bolted it. They torqued it up with probably a pry bar and just basically bolted it there in place. Yeah, there's just some miscellaneous things. I mean this oil breather here on top, that's a black plastic part. You can see they bolted it on there and they just spray painted right over everything. They didn't even plug this, so there's paint inside there also as well, you can see. So a lot of the stuff I'm going to have to clean or just replace and whatnot. I'll probably just end up popping these off. I've got a few extras. I can just replace it and make it right and go from there, because after all, this is a friend and you want to make it right for people that you're going to see. Alright, so I went ahead and pulled the timing cover before I start getting into the rest of the hardware for the turbo. And I want to give it a visual inspection of the actual belt and components themselves. As you can see, the pulleys and whatnot are definitely starting to corrode. It has sat for a while. So I'm going to go ahead and spin this thing over and see if I can even get it to time. And if I can actually get it to time, then we'll go from there and just make sure that it was actually timed correctly. Okay, so what I've done is gone ahead and spun everything over. I actually spun it over a few times just to make sure that my observation was correct and it's actually not timed correctly. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to go off by the timing marks here. Here's your timing mark, that's lined up, and then you're going to want to come down here and these two hash should actually line up, and as you can see, it's actually 1 to 2 teeth off. So that would be it would be 2 teeth off here, and then you come over here, and then we're going to go ahead and do the timing mark. This is on point. Timing mark. Come up here to the timing mark. That's on point. But then when we come back down here again, we're going to go to the double hashes to go ahead and line those up. And this one is actually off by a tooth or two. It looks like maybe 1. So it looks like it's maybe off by 1 or 2 like 1 or 2 teeth here, 1 here, so it's off just a little bit, and because of that, you're absolutely going to have some misfire issues, and and definitely some major issues when it comes to running. So it will have to be retimed and then spun back around just to make sure that everything is going to come back in within timing again, and then we can start removing everything. Alright, so now I've got the timing belt obviously, and now I'm going to go ahead and start working on these cam gears. We'll get these cam gears off, and then I'll get the rear timing covers off, and then I can start removing these heads. Or actually, excuse me, before I can start removing the heads, I'm going to get the exhaust manifold off because I've already pulled the turbo. I've been setting everything right over here for now, just until I can get everything cleaned, and then I can start transferring everything over to the towel and get it ready so that I can start the assembly. But I'm going to have to get into these heads and tear them down, basically do a whole cleaning on them, and if you haven't seen the last video, go back, check that out, and see the reason why we're having to tear this down. So because of having to tear this down, it has added quite a bit of time to the project itself. So hopefully I can get everything done and put back together within the next 2-3 days. Also, one thing I did notice too about this Gates kit was immediately went to the tensioner and looked at that, and actually on the inside here you'll see that it's stamped Japan and not China. So this car was actually assembled long enough and the kit was bought long enough ago that they hadn't changed their companies for these yet. They're now, the tensioners are actually now made in China. So when you buy the Gates kit, make sure that you change your tensioner pulley to the OEM Japan, part. So this they no longer make, so that's actually pretty much like I guess a new old stock. I mean, obviously it was installed, but it has not been used, so there's no wear on it at all. But it being a Japanese part, it has that Japanese quality and not that Chinese quality. So this is actually still probably a good tensioner that can be used. I'm going to have to bench test it, and when I say bench test it, I'm going to have to go in there with a vise and slowly turn it in. I'm talking it's going to take a little while to get that piston in, only for the sheer fact that you want to go slow because you're not trying to explode the seal out. There's a main speed clip that's actually in here. Let me get the light on, so that way you can get an idea. See, there's a speed clip. So this is actually a sealed unit. There's going to be oil in there. So you don't want to put too much pressure on there and too much strain. By pushing that cylinder in, you can actually blow this out, and it will absolutely leak oil. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and slowly bench test it. We'll make sure everything is good. You're going to want to go in and out 2-3 times by pushing the piston in to where it's flush with the outer edge here. And then once that is done, then you can actually put a pin back in it, repin it, and then it can be reinstalled. Because, yeah, it's brand new. It's just got a little bit of surface corrosion on it. So, again, I'm going to test these. I'm going to make sure that all the bearings and everything are not making, any noise and whatnot. So, we'll go through that. We'll make a visual on it and see if we need to do a new timing kit. But as of now, it looks like everything has just been sitting. So, again, I'm going to go through it. I'm going to make sure that there's a visual inspection on it, make sure everything is correct. I have found a lot of loose hardware when I have been taking this apart and disassembly. So a lot of this stuff was actually put together, and I feel like it was done so fast that a lot of things were overlooked. And a lot of hardware wasn't even tight, especially for the turbo. These two studs here, they were finger tight. So because of that, I was able to just walk them off pretty easy. Again, as stated, this is all pretty much hardware from like Lowe's or the hardware store down the road type deals. So because of that, you have a lot of clearance issues. So it's hitting the turbo. I'm going to have to figure out a solution for that, possibly find an OEM nut that is the same thread pitch as this, and then go from there. But for now, I'm going to continue with disassembly, get these cam gears off. Okay, so now it's taken apart. Everything's ready to go. I'm ready to flip this over and start doing the exhaust manifold. But before I do that, it's going to make a huge mess. And that was a really big piece of shit bike that just went by. Sounded like shit. Anyways, long story short, time to flip this thing over before I make a mess. It's going to be a bunch of oil. So we'll drain the oil that's in it. Hopefully there's oil in it. So I haven't seen any come out yet, but if this wasn't stored with oil in it, oh man. So yeah, with that said, let's drain some oil. Alright, exactly what I want to see. Nice, clean, fresh, brand new oil coming right up and out of there. So that's a good thing. That's a plus. So hopefully, all we got to do is just take this thing apart and yeah, we'll do some cleaning. And then we'll put this thing back together the proper way without metal inside. Ha ha ha. Okay, so we are basically at that point where we're at the drizzle point. What I've done is I've rocked this engine back and forth because there's a lot of crevices and nooks and crannies and whatnot inside this engine that actually can store the oil and whatnot in it. So what I did was I basically just rocked the boat. I just take this and rocked it all the way to a 90 degree and then rocked it all the way to a 90 degree and then brought it back to a pivot so that you know, all of the oil will come out of the head and go into the engine, back into the bottom of the oil pan itself, and then when I rock it back in, it comes right back out. So by doing this, you'd be surprised how much oil you can get out of this engine. And also it helps with flushing, you know, any kind of components that are in there, you know, or excuse me, components, I mean contaminants that are in there that you really don't want to be in there. So because of that, I'm doing the kind of rock thing, you know, back and forth, and you know, and then it helps with washing it. So what I tend to do is I let this do its drip thing basically at the state that it's at now, and when it doesn't drip anymore and I can't get anything out of it, then I'll cap it off. Mainly just for the sheer reason, I mean, it's a little over and beyond. Just, I mean, obviously, I'm gonna have to clean this engine and go through it, put all new oil. But this helps because if there is any contaminants in there, they're gonna come out, and that's less that I have to clean, and that's less that I have to worry about, especially when it comes to scoring the inside of the engine. I don't want any scoring to, you know, to happen. So because of this, I'll just go that a little extra mile, just wait a little bit longer, you know, on time as far as dripping the oil. But it is what it is, you know, you just do it right, you know, care about it, and you'd be surprised how far you can go with it. All right, so it's flipped over. I was able to get as much as I could out of it. And as you can see, it does have some aftermarket, you know, Cusco mounts on it. No Cuscos. And, you know, a header and whatnot. And it's got the Killer Bee pan. So it's definitely got some money into it. That was a brand new flywheel that was installed 5 years ago, and it's definitely had some. It's got some corrosion issues. So from here to here is where the clutch actually touches itself. So this is the section that needs to be clean. It seems as though because the clutch was mounted, a lot of the corrosion is actually on the outside. So it looks worse than what it is. But normally when you pull off, you know, OEM flywheels, they're pretty, you know, around this ring. This is all usually that copper color already. But in this instance, it being brand new, there's a decent amount of corrosion on it, especially here. I'm gonna try and clean it up as best as I can, but honestly I think it's gonna have to end up being sent out to a machine shop. It's really cheap to have this cleaned up and just machine it down and whatnot. One thing I did notice was, you know, you can see right there, probably already picked up on it, but right here is it's like a gouge, and I'm not real sure why that's even there, but it was one of those things where I think they were probably using it to turn the teeth or something like that. You know, maybe, you know, that's like an old school method versus, I don't know. But again, the clutch does not touch out there. The starter does. That's what winds on that. But yeah, with that said, I'm basically going to start ripping these heads off, just get this thing just taken apart. I really want to see inside the cylinder walls. I want to see if there's any corrosion that has built up that's actually going to delay this process. And yeah, with that said, let's go ahead and get this header off so I can actually start pulling at least one of these heads off. Alright, so I'm actually back real quick. I haven't got the header off yet, for the main reason that something told me to just try, and because it didn't look so tight, but I kind of reached down and was like, I wonder if these are even tight, and they're not. So it's a good thing that he didn't just run this engine. So because of that, I'm really glad that it came here, and I'm going through it. So, you know, everything happens for a reason, I guess, right? Alright, so we got one brand new looking gasket after I've got the manifold off, and then you pan over here and this one actually looks like it got some water on it. So because they weren't torqued down and there wasn't a good mating surface, water was allowed to get in there. It didn't do it to this side, so good thing. And let's see, we'll do a little visual. Yeah, actually not bad. No water getting on this side. Head looks good. We'll come over here and a little bit of transfer of rust, but Backside, not so bad, but we'll see if we can clean it up. But if not, that, you know, I mean, in my opinion, needs a new gasket. You know, they're cheap, so that's what you do. You replace them. So with that said, he's got a lot of money into this. Let's do it right. Okay, so I got the valve cover off. I got that set to the side. Now we're going to go ahead and start removing all of the camshaft caps here. These are your caps right here, here. And this is the outer caps. These are your outer caps. These are actually have a shorter, or excuse me, a smaller torque spec than these. These are 14 pounds. These are 7 pounds. They're actually half. So we'll go through that when it gets time to assembly. But for now, we're going to go ahead and disassemble this so that we can get the head pulled off. I see some side notes in here, which is, you know, making me feel good that everything was spec'd correctly. So we'll go ahead and get into that. The first thing I normally do when I pull these off is do a visual inspection of the actual head studs themselves. He said that it was built, so I had already assumed that there was some kind of head stud in here, and it looks like by the label on the top that they are ARP head studs, as you can see. So we know that what series these are and whatnot, so we can go ahead and start basically you know, disassembling everything. We'll set everything off to the side. We're going to go ahead and label everything in the process so it goes back in the same exact spot. I like to put the same hardware back in the same spot just because it was stretched or pre-stretched in that destination. So I like to put bolt to thread, you know, so it's just the best way that I can possibly put it in a scientific method when it comes down to metal. You know, that bolt was stretched in that hole, so we'll go ahead and put it back in that hole and put it back to spec. So with that said, we'll go ahead and disassemble everything right now, and yeah, fun time. Alright, so now I'm down to the point where it's time to start pulling some head studs out of here, and well, in this case the head stud nuts, because these are ARPs, which are threaded into the block itself, and then you are to level them out to install them correctly. And yeah, they don't get torqued into the block also as well. They're basically just a snug fit, and then you're able to put them to torque spec with the nut that they provide. Also, they also give you a washer as well. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the ARP out, or excuse me, the ARP nut and washers out. You have to do this in sequence, so make sure that you do this in sequence. So from the sequence that you put it in, you're going to reverse the way out. So the last bolt will now be the first bolt that you will attack. So that's how you address this. You de-stress it. So as you're putting the stress onto it to put the head back on, you de-stress it by taking it back off in the same exact process. So I've got the camshaft sitting right over here. Everything's all ready to go. I've got the valve cover all wrapped up so we're not making any spillage anywhere. Everything, all the cam caps are in order, so I know exactly where they go. Hardware with the cam caps also as well. And this is just sitting here for now so that I can go ahead and wrap it up and then clean it later before installation. We'll throw some assembly oil on it, put it back inside the heads, and put it back together. But for now, we're going to go ahead and get this head off because I really do need to see a visual inspection of the actual cylinder walls itself, because this motor has been sitting for a very long time, you know, about 5.5 years now. So because of that, they are usually pretty sealed engines as far as sitting, but you know, it's better to be safe than sorry, right? Especially for the amount of money that he has into it. You know, this being a hybrid build, it has the 2L heads on it. They're built, as well as the engine. It's a fully forged build. It is a 257 short block that has forged internals in it, and you know, 272 cams, so, and everything to support it and whatnot. But it is a 0 mileage engine that has been sitting for a very long time. So because of that, there are precautions that you have to take in order to be able to run this. And by all means, it would have failed if it was ran in the condition that it was in. So that is why we are tearing it down. Alright, so let me grab my magnet here. In the process of taking all of the ARP nuts and washers off, and in the process of doing so, I noticed that, look on that washer right there, you see that clump right there? That clump is actually metal. Whoops, I don't want to pull that out right just yet. It's a powerful magnet. But anyways, long story short, you can see right here, I'll go ahead and I'll pull this washer out. I'm trying to do it left-handed, there we go. That sitting on top of there, you see it focus, there we go. That's metal, that's a big metal chunk. That was inside the head, and you can see right there on the outer rim, there's some other metal particulates even sitting on the face right there. So yeah, with that said, very, very glad I'm taking this apart. Okay, all the nuts and washers are off now, so we'll go ahead and remove this head, and we'll slide it over to the side over there. Alright, so the head is sitting over there, all the internals and the guts for the head, the assembly, all the forged parts are sitting aside, and I've gone ahead and done a visual inspection once I pulled everything off. First problem I've come across. I'll go ahead and turn the light on for you real quick, you can get an idea, and we'll see if you can see what the problem is here. There's no helical honing. There's no cross-hatching. Literally. This was assembled without cross-hatching the cylinder walls. It literally is not helicaled at all. Like, at all. There's no cross-hatching. And that scares me. That super duper scares me. This will scuff and score the cylinder walls. So, yeah, good thing I did a visual inspection. Alright, so it's the next day. Was able to come up with a game plan for it, and we're going to go ahead and finish disassembling it. I've got it flipped over, and I'm going to go ahead and work on the driver's side now. That way I can get everything all wrapped up and whatnot, and then send the short block out. That way it can get done correct. Yeah, let's finish this up. Alright, well, I got everything off. Same ordeal on the inside. Absolutely no helical. You know, I haven't wiped anything down on the inside to give you a better idea. I'll turn the light. No helical. Nothing. Just the score marks from the piston going up and down, but still no helicals. So I'm going to go ahead and get this thing all wrapped up. That way I can get it shipped out and it can get spec'd, you know, the correct way and whatnot, reassembled the correct way. Also notice that inside is a lot of corrosion, you know, all that crap you can see in the water channel that runs around, that is rust. It's very gritty, you know, so the block itself is going to have to be cleaned. You know, there's definitely some corrosion issue going on. You know, something was corroding and allowing it to get inside, so either that or they just didn't clean it very well, you know. And even just popping this off and looking at the top of these pistons, you know, it's really sketchy, you know. Like, this is supposed to be a new build, 0 miles, and I see stiction on that piston right there, almost as though these are used pistons that have been cleaned up and reinstalled in this build, and that's how I see it.